Thank you.
All right, so the court going into closed session now. Will they take up whether or not they should release portions of an audio transcription of a hearing that took place on October the 14th, and then a written transcription of the hearing on October the 24th, both of which have been under seal, which, Sandra, leads to a lot of what people are complaining about, and that is that after we had the avalanche of information about the arrest of Tyler Robinson, everything else seems to be under a blanket of secrecy.
Yeah, indeed. Let's bring back in our panel now, Josh, Donna, and Jonathan. Donna, your thoughts as you've been covering this from the very beginning on what has transpired so far, and sort of bring our viewers along with what's happening right now.
Well, I think right now what we're seeing is this kind of push and pull between what is going to be weighed as more important. Is the judge going to rule that the transparency of the public and media and everyone knowing what's going on there going to outweigh what potentially may be a risk to Mr. Robinson getting a fair trial? I do think that in our world today, and I've said this often, the court system and our laws don't really keep up with technology and media and things that are happening very fast. And it's really difficult to be able to weigh those things out to determine whether or not Mr. Robinson will be able to get a fair trial if certain pieces of information are revealed to the public, as we're now seeing in Mangione as well, that those are issues that are being brought to the court's attention. So I think the court's job is to make sure that they allow for as much transparency as possible and give Mr. Robinson the ability for his due process and to have a fair trial, and to be able to find a jury pool that will be able to be fair based on what they hear prior to this case coming forward. Now, anything that they're going to bring out at these hearings most likely is going to be evidence in a trial that a jury would hear. Of course, if there's motions to suppress that evidence, that may raise this issue again before the court. But I do think that the court is going to take it seriously, and I do think he will err on being more transparent than not.
I thought it was interesting that Judge Graff ruled that members of Tyler Robinson's family would not be allowed to stay in the courtroom during this hearing into what will be released. Brett Tolman, who's with us, and we'll see him in just a little while, said, well, that could be potentially because some of the family members may be called as witnesses. And Josh, if they were privy to everything that was aired in those hearings, what could the potential effect of that be?
Yeah, that's always a concern. You want to make sure that whoever's present in the courtroom isn't potentially going to be a witness later on, and it might cloud their testimony. But the other thing I think we're learning about this judge is it's remarkable to me, every time we've seen him in court, how conscientious he is, how deliberate he is. He always seems to have his remarks prepared. And I think that we see the same thing today in the way that he introduced what they're going to talk about today, and how deliberative he is about all of this. And as far as this first hearing, I think the concern is primarily about courtroom security. That's why it was put under seal originally, and why the transcripts and the recordings have not been released, because it has to do with courtroom security. I could see him keeping that under seal because of that reason, and because it doesn't really have to do with the facts and circumstances of the case. But I agree with Donna that I'm hoping today, and I think it might be an indication by the judge allowing for him to dress down in civilian clothing and not have cameras picture him shackled, that is an indication that he will lean towards allowing cameras in courtroom, because I think the transparency of this case is so important. We saw in the lead up to this hearing, Erica Kirk talking about conspiracy theories and misinformation that is out there. And the best way to fight that is allow cameras in the courtroom so people can see exactly how justice is being served.
Jonathan, your thoughts on what has transpired so far?
Well, I think that Judge Graff is handling this exactly as he had to. You know, many of us have been advocates for greater television coverage within these courtrooms for literally decades. And the rule against it is rather dated. Now, it's true that in these preliminary hearings, we expect that much of those hearings is going to be redacted. The cameras will be turned off. If you're talking about the suppression of evidence, you're probably not going to want that to be aired widely to a potential jury pool. But that has never been a serious problem. We've all seen coverage of trials. judges have been quite nimble in this respect in determining whether witnesses can be shown or not shown, whether certain arguments, particularly in pretrial, will be made public. But the real question for Judge Graff is, are you going to make this trial available to the public? The framers felt very strongly that trials should be public. And that is reflected in the Constitution. And the reason that they felt that way is unfortunately being borne out with Erica and her objections, that the best way to avoid misunderstandings is to expose any governmental abuse, to expose what occurs in these cases, is for the public to be able to see it with their own eyes. And instead, if you have this lack of transparency, you have these contemptible conspiracy theories that spring up, particularly now on the internet. And this is a way to combat that, to allow greater transparency for all parties involved.
All right, good thoughts, Professor Turley. Jonathan, stand by. Donna and Josh, stand by too, because we want to bring in Brett Tolman. He's the former U.S. Attorney for Utah, also the Right on Crime Executive Director. Brett, good to have you with us. Good observation with the judge potentially excluding the family because they may be called as witnesses at a future point. In terms of the coverage of this trial and transparency, Erica Kirk has a couple of different reasons. One is all these conspiracy theories that are out there and whether or not people from Turning Point USA were somehow involved. And then the other is almost kind of like an eye for an eye. Listen to what she told Jesse Waters back on the 5th.
There were cameras all over my husband when he was murdered. There have been cameras all over my friends and family mourning. There have been cameras all over me, analyzing my every move, analyzing my every smile, my every tear. We deserve to have cameras in there. Let everyone see what true evil is.
So she's making the point that everything about her husband's assassination was very, very public. Why should the man accused of perpetrating it be shielded from public view?
Well, she makes an incredible point. I mean, the reality is what we're analyzing, John, is can you preserve constitutional protections, due process, and a fair trial with cameras in the courtroom? And I'm afraid that the old arguments don't really apply. The strongest argument that many have argued is, well, it turns it into a circus. You have lawyers that want to become actors and judges, and perhaps the O.J. Simpson trial was something that jades that view. The reality is, though, this is something that is needed in order to achieve justice, because you do have to have the public as part of this, and that's why you opened courtrooms. Jonathan Turley is absolutely right. They got contemplated opening the courtroom and for citizens walking in. They sat in the rafters and the galleys and everywhere else. They sat and watched trials occur. Now we have media that can accomplish that to a greater extent, and it needs to happen in this case.
Brett, Sandra here in New York, we're watching this tape playback on their screen right now of the moments before we heard from the judge. Tyler Robinson, 22 years old, sitting with his attorneys. And he appeared smiling and even laughed at one point. And Jonathan was making the point that, oftentimes you see this, the accused criminal separating himself, being able to separate himself from the crime. I wonder if you could just further weigh in on that, as you have obviously seen courtrooms like this many times.
Yeah, and Sandra, the thing that is so easily forgotten are the victims in the case. And so you work as a prosecutor, you work as a defense attorney, and it becomes your day in, day out. And let's face it, they're seeing a more human side to Mr. Robinson than the side that the victims in this case ever received or observed. And the rest of us, look, we saw it play out on television, live, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. It's the prosecutor's role and the judge's role to never let that be forgotten while he's being tried. The decorum, the seriousness of what's happening. It's not surprising to me to see somebody that was so brazen in what they did in murdering Charlie Kirk that they then sit in the courtroom without what we would like to see, and that is a sense of remorse, a sense of regret, and that's just not going to happen during this trial.
As we pointed out, Brett, at the top of this, as we were introducing you, that you were the former U.S. Attorney in the state of Utah. Is there anything peculiar to Utah law that people should be waiting for here?
Well, one thing that is peculiar is Utah is at the discretion of the judge in terms of how much publicity or how much openness and transparency. A lot of states have adopted policies that you know can basically take that decision away from the judge.